We now have a basic app framework set up with navigation and a header, but we haven't got any functionality yet. So what we're going to do now is add an input field, which will let a user type something into it, and then we'll grab that data and update it to a label on the page. This will be the first step in starting to work with forms and implementing, hopefully, what can turn into useful functionality. So what we'll do on our form 1 or our home screen, we will delete this label because we won't really need this anymore. Let's drag in an input, and we're going to use the Bootstrap 4 input because it's nicely styled, and if we drag it in we can see what it looks like. So we can see it comes with a label and also the input field here. Okay, so before we start implementing anything, let's just get the layout right to keep our design and usability as good as possible. So we dragged it into the page, and we can drag it about. We can manually modify the width. But what would be a good thing to do would be to make sure that it's responsive, or that it adapts to the size of the screen that this will be eventually used on. In a similar way that we modified some of the width, left, top and right settings for the navigation button here, the hamburger menu. So let's see how we can do this with an input field. So if we click on the input, we have our properties show up in the properties window, and we can see here we've got some properties here that will be useful for us to edit. So what we're going to do is set the dimensions, or the number of pixels from the left-hand side. Let's set that to something like 25, and we can keep that consistent for any other inputs or elements that we add. For the width, let's put auto. Okay, and then that snaps it down to quite a small width, which we don't really want. But what we can do then is say that from the right-hand side, we'll have a gap of 25 pixels as well. And what happens there, because the width is set to auto, the padding on the left and the padding on the right is fixed. And what that means is, depending on the size of the window, this input will automatically fill the width, but you'll always have a left padding and a right padding of 25 pixels. Okay, so that's nice and responsive. Let's look at customizing this input now. So let's find the label, and we can change the text that's there. So sometimes it takes a little bit of figuring out which property relates to the element that you can see on screen. So here, it's actually the header that relates to the text there. So let's change that to, okay, so we're going to request the user's name. So enter your name here. Let's see what other properties we can change. We also have the placeholder value. And now this is the text that appears within the input field, but will disappear as soon as the user starts typing into it. So this is optional. We could delete it, and then we won't have any placeholder. Or we could add custom text. What should we say? Well, we could duplicate enter your name here. But is this particularly useful, duplicating that text? It looks a bit strange. So if we've got the label, perhaps we don't actually need the placeholder. We could actually rely on the placeholder and have no label. But then that's really a usability or design choice. In this case, I think I'm going to delete the placeholder, and I'm going to keep the label. So we've just got a clean input field there. The last thing I'm going to change is the ID which is, again, if you remember, the ID is the identifier for the control, and that's how we refer to it in our code. And we need to get the values from it, for example, and we'll be looking at that shortly. Instead of input 1, which isn't a very sensible name or useful name, I'm going to change that to text input name. And there isn't a kind of set way that you have to name these, but you'll want to stick to a convention or stick to a common way of naming these inputs and the IDs that you use for control so that you can stay organized. So I've changed the ID there, and you can see that in our Project Explorer, that input ID is now updated. Okay. Let's see what this looks like in the browser by running it. So let's run the app. We'll switch to our browser. And there we go. It looks very similar to what we've got in AppStudio. We've got enter your name here, and we've got an input. And in our browser, we can start typing. So I can type my name. Of course, at the moment, it doesn't do anything, but that's what we're going to change next. So just as an example, let's see what we can do with this input. Let's drag in a label, and I'm going to use, again, a Bootstrap 4 label instead of the normal common label. Again, it's a little bit more flexible by using the Bootstrap 4 control. And I'd recommend, if you have a choice, probably go for Bootstrap normally and stick to that, as that will give you better design out of the box. So let's drag a label across. I am going to set the left-hand position of the label to 25 again for consistency, so we can see from a design point of view things are lining up. And we could again set the right value to 25 and the width auto, and then it'll be a full width label. Not so important for a label, because when we view it on screen, there isn't a boundary. You only see the value that's in it. Okay, so let's customize a couple of properties. The ID that it's been given is label 3, but let's give it something a little bit more sensible. Label name. And the value, well, actually, I don't want anything to appear in it when the app loads. So I'm going to delete the value, and then it almost disappears, as you can see here. And because we've got an auto height, it actually reduces to effectively 0 pixels high. For convenience, let's just change that to 50 pixels, and then at least we've got it on screen, and if we click in it, we can see it. Now, of course, if you've got invisible elements, so when you click off, it kind of disappears, you can get access to it again through the Project Explorer. It'll always be on the project navigation here. Okay, so we've got a label, and what we're going to do with this, well, the idea here is to let the user enter their name, and as they start typing, their name will appear on the label. Okay, so let's do this. So if we right-click on the input, we can create a new event, and for an input, we see we have quite a lot of JavaScript events available. We've got onClick, onChange, onPaste, all of these different events that JavaScript is aware of. Now, the one we're going to use in this case is onChange. Now, when we've clicked that, it goes straight to our code tab, and it has created an onChange event with a function, and in here we can put our code. This is what we're going to run any time that the value in that input changes. So what we're going to do is get the value that's currently in this input and push it directly into the label. So let's try and do this now. So our label is called label name. So in our code, we will start typing label name. And if we hit dot, we're then given a series of options, both properties and functions that are available on that control or object. So that label has various options that we can call on. And what we're going to do, we're going to set the inner HTML of that label to a value. So if we were just setting it to a static value, we could just assign a string to it. And if we made any change to the input field, that would immediately change the value of the label to test, and we would see test on the app. Now that's not particularly useful. We want the actual value from the input field. So what's our input called? Well, its ID is text input name. So start typing that and hit the dot, and we can see all the different options. And again, this is something you'll get used to as you're coding more. You'll get used to the common properties that you want to access. In this case, we will be looking for value. So we can double click that, or you can type it manually. So this single line of code, what it will do, it's getting the value from the input field, and we are assigning it to the inner HTML or content of the label. So let's see if this works. So we'll save that and we'll run the app in our browser. And we'll just make sure it has updated. Okay, so there's no label. Now let's just start typing. Okay, so if you see what happened there, as I started typing, nothing happened, but when I clicked off, then the name updated and popped into the label. Okay. Now let's say we wanted the value to update as we type, so not having to wait until we click off the input. Well, let's see what other actions were available for this input, or events rather. So if we right click on the input, we go to event. Let's have a look for a different, more suitable event. And in fact, the one we need would be on key up. So effectively, this means after a character is typed, whether it's on a keyboard, on your mobile device, or computer, then this action will trigger. So if we click on that, we can see it will create an on key up event. And what we'll do, let's take that code and put that in the on key up action, and we'll delete the on change. So let's save that and run that and see how that works. Okay. And now we're typing, and you can see as I type, the label updates in real time.